Welcome to this. Hey, everybody. Again, we missed you. We missed you. And we thank you for joining us again for a great show. We have a phenomenal guest. I'm Jamie.
I'm Latoya.
And I'm Calandra.
And today our guest is coming from Australia. I love her accent. It is beautiful. I just love it. She's already started talking, and I'm just like, so Miss Tiffany is a big advocate in co-parenting. And we found that to be a very unique conversation because it is such a today issue. Some think it's a great idea, some think it's a bad idea, some think it can be done, some people think it can be done. So I'm going to give it over to Miss Tiffany and let her give her a little bit more about herself and let us know why she got this started.
Thank you so much for having me here. It is a real privilege to be able to talk with you. And yes, I am on Wajak Noongar Budja, which is in Perth, Western Australia. And I'm excited to talk to you because knowing how to co-parent well after separation is a super tricky minefield for parents to navigate at a time when their hearts are heavy. There are so many emotions happening for them. They've got the stress of learning how to live across two homes and figuring out what is right for their children and for themselves. And my experience in when I first started working in this space was that there were plenty of legal services for families, but so few therapeutic supports or coaching supports to actually step parents through how on earth to make this massive change. So there were plenty of parenting courses for just standard raising the kids, or if you're raising kids with additional needs, there's training resources and even funding for that. But for this major life transition that families were going through, they were largely just being left on their own, other than massive legal fees and further conflict. And so when I first stepped in, I was working with families that were entrenched in the legal system and were going through trial, had been there for up to 7 years. I don't know what it's like over there, but in Australia, it can take 4 years for a matter to be resolved through the court. That's a quarter of a child's lifetime. And my real sense in that space is we are starting too late. We don't want to be there at the time that this conflict has been going on for the parents, for the children, for all of that amount of time. We want to be there wrapping around families at the time that they're making that transition so that they have resourcing and support and don't have to figure it all out by themselves when they're going through their darkest, hardest days.
Okay.
Well, I say that is a beautiful thing. I don't know if it takes 4 years in America. Either way, the process is difficult, whether it's 4 months. You know what I'm saying? Like you're saying, it's a difficult transition. And I think it's an interesting subject, especially for women and men who are in relationships with those people who are dealing with it. So I'm interested to see how this subject goes today. Go ahead, Ms. Toya.
So can you tell us, where did the passion come from? Like, why are you so passionate about the co-parenting?
I've always been passionate about parenting, full stop. When I first started my career more than 20 years ago, which makes me feel a little old now, but I think I've still got more years ahead of me than behind me for that. I thought that I wanted to really work with children and teens. I thought that was a space that I wanted to be in. And I quickly realized in my early career that if I was serious about supporting the outcomes for children and teens, then they weren't the people that I needed to be directly in front of. It was parents that I really wanted to be able to serve, because I might be able to see a child or a teen a maximum maybe an hour a week, but parents are there all of the time. That the starting point was actually not to do with separated families, but working with families of serious repeat juvenile offenders. And it was the very best place to start, because we were going in and working with families that so much of society had rejected and judged. And when we first were going into those homes, that was their fear about us as well, that we were another service that had come to judge. And what I saw was people working as hard as they could, loving their kids as much as they could, and completely lost at knowing what on earth to do to help these kids out. Nobody dreams that they are going to raise children that will end up incarcerated. And so being able to work with them with compassion, to be able to look at the context that had created the situation that they were in, and particularly unfortunately in Australia, so much of that is about multi-generational trauma and huge systemic issues that are far bigger than the family. As I started working later in career with separated families, what I found was in many ways they were having an even tougher time, because society kind of seems to expect that, I don't know if it's just because separation is so common that people think it's just all kind of sorted out, but these are families who are very much being left to their own. If you have a serious illness within a family, or some other kind of trauma or tragedy, then there's a casserole roster that happens, and there's people doing collections to help out with financial expenses. There's GoFundMe campaigns, but we don't, as a society, seem to wrap around separating families in the same way. And then with that is that, much like the families that were raising juvenile offenders, I don't know that many people dream of falling in love, creating a family, and then separating and moving out and living across two homes. Like it's not on anybody's vision board to do that. And so making the decision to do that is terrifying. It's hard work, and it's freaking courageous to actually make that call that it is going to be healthier for me as a parent. It's going to be healthier for my children if this relationship stops being a romantic one and transitions across to a co-parenting one. But then, and this is what drives me nuts, is that if we go to all of our reference sources that we have outside of therapy rooms and coaching spaces, we have sitcoms and movies. And in our family, we're a big fan of the Marvel world. And most of those stories involve people who've been raised by sole parents with complete estrangement from the other parent. And so there's not a lot in the mainstream narrative about how two people can co-parent together and raise children as part of one family across two homes.
Okay. And you kind of touched on my next question. So you said that it takes courage to end a relationship that is not serving all members. Because I know a lot of people find that they kind of take it hard or be hard on themselves in situations like that. Like, I wasn't a good wife, I wasn't a good husband, I wasn't a good parent because the relationship or the marriage didn't work. So a lot of people stay in bad situations for the sake of the kids. I see it all the time.
Excuse me. That's exactly right. So often the first story that I hear is a story of failure, the story of we've let the kids down, or I've let the kids down, or I made the wrong choice. Sometimes it's a lot of anger and grief towards the self, sometimes a lot of anger and grief towards the other party. But none of us have a crystal ball. And sometimes the grenades that are thrown at relationships are ones that the context in the history of these people, they weren't given the skills to navigate, or they were just too much for where they were at that time. And when I think about what that is like for children and for parents to be in that system, and we've all heard of those stories of people who do stay together for the children. And I would say that sometimes the best thing to do is to separate for the children, because the children do far better in two harmonious homes than they do growing up in a home that has a toxic culture, because the parents are just trying to stay together. And the whole concept of we're staying together for the kids, or when the kids move out, that's when we can go our separate ways, is terrible modeling for the kids, honestly, because it's not modeling what a healthy romantic attachment can be like, or how to honor your own needs and to say, I matter here. And it's a disservice to the person that you're in a relationship with, because I fundamentally believe that each person is incredibly lovable and and worthy of having a connected relationship with someone who celebrates them, who brings out their strengths, who helps them be their best version of themselves. And if that's not the person that you are in a relationship with, and you've worked at doing that, and you've tried the best that you can, if it's done, it's done. And then the right thing to do is to allow yourself to leave.
Correct. Because I always have believed if you're happy in your life and what you're doing and in your space, you can be a better parent.
Absolutely.
So if that means you got to be with somebody else or live across town, then that's what you need to do in order to be a better person and a better parent.
Completely.
Okay. So the next question, Miss Tiffany, what do you feel like is the biggest barrier and challenge for the co-parenting? Okay, I think we kind of touched in a little bit and the things that you've already spoken of, but what do you think, like in your practice, like what are you seeing like the most common barriers being and challenges?
There are so many, and I think one of the biggest challenges is that we love our little people with our entire hearts. They are an extension, not an extension of ourselves, but they are our hearts outside of our bodies. And for most parents, the idea that those little people's heads are not going to be on a pillow at their home every night of the week is devastating.
It is
devastating. And when there is that context of hurt and anger or betrayal, or all the feelings that come up in the midst of a separation, it can be exceedingly hard to make room for not only not having the child with you, but to have the child with that other parent, or to hold the view that that other parent is having that same experience of a grief and distress at not being able to be available for the child. It can be really tricky for parents to know what is the best kind of shared care arrangement. And so often we will have two people who are very committed to the best interests of the children, doing what's right for the kids, but they have very different views about what that is. And that can be really hard to step through when often the communication skills have been one of the things that has been really tricky for them. And I think particularly for mums, what can be really hard is that when it's been a household together, predominantly still we have mums doing the lion's share of the care work, and making the school lunches and doing the homework routines and tracking all of those things. And often there can be a sense of resentment, or a sense that the father hasn't been contributing or as involved or as emotionally attuned. And what often happens when they separate is that the father's like, well, I've got to step up. I have to step into this space. And they do. but it can be so hard and hard on the heart for mums in that space to be able to recognize that that is happening, and also to make room for the grief that it wasn't happening before.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I would also look at it and go, that speaks volumes to what that father's view was of the mother's capacity to provide for all those needs and do all of that caring, that it speaks a huge amount about how valuable her role has been.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's not always mums in that role and dads in that role, and we're not always looking at mums and dads either. We may have mums and dads and dads.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever we've got, there's that big change in what those relationships are going to look like. And then I think the other one I'd like to touch on, and then I better stop there, otherwise I will just keep going, is drawing the new boundaries, knowing what information should you be sharing with your co-parent, what critique, what advice should you be giving your co-parent, because it's an entirely different relationship to be co-parents across two homes than it is to be an intact family. And there's no clear-cut guide that you can pick up and says these are just the boundaries you should have from now on. And learning how to have those new boundaries is a tricky business. Infinitely doable and well worth doing, because it makes the load so much lighter. There is so much less you have to carry if you have some clear boundaries in place.
So do you think that when the other person starts to date someone new, that causes friction with the co-parenting as well, right?
It really does. It really does. And often we will have a co-parenting dynamic that's going fairly well. And yes, when somebody new comes in, that can be incredibly unsettling. And for anyone who's in that space who might be listening to this, one of the things that I would really want you to know is nobody replaces you ever in the hearts of your children. Right. And the fear and anxiety is normal, but absolutely nobody can replace you in their hearts. And if you are listening and it is you who is in a new relationship, the key piece of advice that I would give that person is tell your co-parent before you tell the kids. Give them the opportunity to meet the new person in a neutral space, have a coffee together, have a Zoom call together. Let them know who it is that you're bringing into the child's life, and respect them as your co-parent and the role that they have in the life of the kids, to let them know. What that does is allows the other parent time to have all of their emotional reaction, right? To be able to process it, to be able to make sense of it, so that when the children do come to talk to them about it, they're ready to show up and be the parent, because they're not having to deal with their own shock or grief right in front of their kids. It's always best to never blindside your co-parent with hard and difficult news, because you just don't want your kids to be exposed to that part.
You know what? That's a good way of looking at that. And I'm and that I said that before, we kind of got into the questions asking you, being the people that are getting in relationships with parents that are going through that within their home. I've always felt like, it shouldn't be this big meetup and this big interview process. And because I always feel like, you never know, I may not even be talking to you next week. You know what I'm saying? So it always have kind of been a bothersome to me to have this big sit down with this person and whatever, get all these questions asked and everything, because I feel like I can lie to you about everything you ask me. You see what I'm saying? And not really mean any good or whatever the case may be. Or maybe I need, maybe I'm good, but I'm just trying to hurry up and get out of this situation because I'm uncomfortable too. But the way that you present it, it kind of makes it a little bit easier to maybe be, am I making sense? Like maybe be okay with sitting down with that person and trying, because you're basically saying, hey, the emotional outburst that may happen, or the discomfort that the parent may have, whether it's the mom or the dad, is decreased if there was a heads up, kind of is what you're saying, if they were given a heads up.
Look, absolutely. And I would hate it to ever feel like it's an interview process, because and I think that comes back to the boundaries conversation, is that you've lost that right to have that say over who they're in a relationship with, and whether or not that person has a role in the life of the children. However, I would say that if you love yourself, if you think that you're a pretty damn fine catch, chances are your co-parent has exceptional taste. So if you'd met this person under other circumstances, you would probably be really good friends. And we often create demon stories about the other, about the person that we don't know, about the stranger. And it is so much harder to do that when you've come face to face. And for the new partner coming in, because obviously that could be an incredibly scary thing for them to be doing, it's also really useful for them to be able to see who is this person, and for them to be able to get to know each other on their own terms, and not through the lens of the person who has been with one and is now with the other. I do think, though, that it's very fair to wait until the relationship has some really good legs in it, to know that it's actually got some roads to go.
That's what I'm saying. Also, I tell people all the time, I always feel like the mom is not in the discomfort situation, because kids tell their moms everything. They tell them everything. Usually, what I've experienced, they'll come home and tell their mom everything they did with the dad. They're going to tell the mom everything they did with dad, from when they got in the car all the way till they came back home and was in the driveway. But kids don't necessarily do that with dads. They don't come and tell their dad everything they've been doing with their mom. So in that, I feel like by the time we do meet, she already knows probably where I stay, where I work, what I look like, what my, you know what I mean, what my house look like. So I've always felt like that interview is really not her trying to be comfortable, like, who is this person that's going to be around the kids? It's really all about being nosy. You know what I'm saying? Like, who is this? Who are you? You know what I mean? The kids been coming, talking about you all the time and things like that. So it's like having that conversation with you, like you have no idea about nothing about me. That kind of bothers me. Am I making sense, or am I sounding like real, like defensive? Just let me know. Just be honest.
Well, I think you are making sense. I think it speaks to why it is so important to meet the co-parent before the kids meet the new partner. It gets around all of that, and it means that instead, when the kids come home and say, "Hey, Mum, I've met the new partner and she's really lovely," Mum can go, "I know, isn't she the best? Like, we had the greatest catch up the other day," and it can make it so safe for kids to feel that they can continue to tell Mum everything, because if they become worried that they have to protect Mum or keep secrets from Mum because Mum can't handle it and it will distress Mum, then that very precious relationship that you've just talked about changes. And the other thing I'd say is I think predominantly you are right that children often tell more to their mums than to their dads, probably because of some of the things that we talked about before in terms of those early, mum has been doing a lot of that stuff. Sometimes, of course, it is the other way around. Children will often have one parent that they tell more of the things, and that's not a sign that the other parent isn't a good parent or isn't an attuned parent.
No.
It's just a different relationship, and those different relationships that the children have with each parent serve really important functions and purposes. So one of the things that generally dads excel at far better than mums is all the rough and tumble play, and kind of the boisterous mucking about and wrestling, and all of that stuff is essential for kids learning resilience and learning the boundaries of play, and learning a huge amount about their body and space and time. And I've really tried, like when my mine are tall now, but when they were little, I tried so hard to do that with them at times, but I am really good at cuddles and reading books and singing nursery rhymes. Those are my strengths, and rough and tumble is just not it.
Well,
Until next time.
there's strength in sisterhood.
And support in sisterhood.
Bye.
Bye.